Okay, good morning, everybody. It is 10:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I know people are going to continue joining for the first couple minutes probably, but thank you for joining us today. I'm actually really excited about this presentation titled Nuclear Power Plants That Impact Missouri and Planning for Their Unlikely Disasters. My name is Ashley Shannon. I've been with the state of Missouri for about 11 years now. Spent about 10 years at the Department of Revenue and got on with FEMA here a couple years ago. Jason Davenport is going to be our presenter today, and I will let him introduce himself to you. Over to you, Jason.
Hey, Ashley, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time. My goal is to use about a half an hour to kind of go over some things, and I hope it's useful to you. I can finally see the chat. Yesterday, I didn't have that figured out. So if you have a question as we go, my preference is just to go ahead and ask, and we'll address it right there while we're on the slides. If you prefer to wait till the end, that's fine too. That's your call. So let's see if I can get this going. Okay, so here's our team at SEMA. I joined on in February of 2021. I manage this group of 5. Our admin support, Jerry Guzman, has been with us for a little over a year now. He's phenomenal. He does a really good job. He actually helps out in lab and does all kinds of great things for us. If you've interacted with our group in the last, say, 20 years, you might know Jim Kammerer, affectionately known as Jim Jack. He kind of runs our lab for us. He's been doing that for a long time, carries a lot of knowledge for us. And then the 2 ladies, those are our planners. They, both Kelly Motaz and Sarah Brockus Miller, they help us write plans. So that's who we are. A little bit of background about me, where I came from. I got my degree in 2007 from Missouri State in chemistry. And then I joined a National Guard team where I worked full-time. It was called the Civil Support Team, where I was the science officer. Got to do a lot of really cool things with them. Go out to the training sites and things like that. Did a lot of radiation. I was a radiation safety officer there and did a lot of field work. So that's my background. Did about 4 months in Los Alamos. Ended up wanting to come back home, so I wasn't there very long. I was only there for about 4 months and then came back to work here with SEMA. So that's who I am. By the way, I tend to be a fast presenter, so that's just kind of my MO. If you have any questions, though, I see the chat.
And if you think Jason is going too quickly, there's an option at the very bottom on your reactions. You can send him a turtle and just say, slow down. That is an option, a fun new feature in WebEx.
I did not know that. Thank you for telling me. So a little bit of history about the program, affectionately known as REP, Radiation Emergency Preparedness. In 1979, there was an accident in 3 Mile Island, which is in Pennsylvania. Basically, they had a partial meltdown. What occurred was a relief valve for steam basically stuck open. And the instruments indicated that it had closed, but it did not. And so the operator's actions, if they would have taken no action, there would not have been an issue at all. But the operator's actions actually caused the situation to get worse. And that was just to the best of their training. They did the best that they could and caused the incident there at 3 Mile Island. Prior to the accident there at the plant in Pennsylvania, nuclear power was dirt cheap. It was extremely cheap. And that's basically due to the lack of regulation. So after that, both the NRC and FEMA got together, and the NRC basically said, we'll take care of everything inside the wire. So everything on site belongs to the National or Nuclear Regulatory Commission, while everything off-site belongs to FEMA. So our program works primarily with FEMA, the off-site response. So one of the points to note that is due to all of the regulation, however, basically what they did is they created one of the safest industries out there. If you look at there was a graph, and I couldn't find it this morning, but basically listing out different types of industries. And offshore fishing is on the top of one of the most dangerous, and all the way at the bottom is the nuclear power plant industry. It's extremely safe. So I thought I'd go into a little bit about the responsibilities of the different organizations, because the response is all the way through government. It's an all-of-government approach. You have FEMA, which is our counterpart at the federal level. They work closely with us at the state level and local partners through exercises and drills and whatnot. They help us with meetings and conducting interviews and the like. Our program here at the state works closely with the FEMA REP program. They call us on a regular basis, as I call them, asking questions quite often. So they're a great resource for us. Yeah, and their primary role is to provide guidance to the state and local emergency managers and provide reasonable assurance to the NRC that the offsite capabilities are adequate. So us here at the state, in an emergency situation, the primary role is to establish the state level unified command. We maintain that state level response capability. That's primarily through Department of Health and DNR. Those are our technical responders out in the field at the state level. We do a lot of maintenance of the state level plans and county level plans when requested. That's primarily done in our shop here at SEMA. We do a lot of plans writing here. So. And when requested, we do offer a lot of training for the local counties and fire responders. So there's that option as well. Our county folks are busy. Every time we interact with them, I do my best to be very brief and to the point and get the information I need, or send the information I need to send and get out. They're not just dealing with radiation, they're dealing with floods, they're dealing with tornadoes, they're dealing with all of the day-to-day operations, 911 centers, all of the like. And to top it off, they're ultimately responsible for the county response plans for the REP program. It's important to note that in the state of Missouri, county commissioners are responsible for making decisions, and that's per law. So here at the state level, we are not making those types of decisions with respect to what to do to protect the public. We provide recommendations, and that's based off of a lot of technical staff, but we provide that to county commissioners and emergency managers, and ultimately it's on those county commissioners to make the decisions on what they wish to do. That kind of makes it a little challenging to work with Nebraska. Nebraska, it's not that way. Their state makes those decisions. So it really doesn't pose too much of an issue. We work pretty well with the state of Nebraska. We're usually sitting side by side when we have to work with Nebraska. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. So here's the two plants that we primarily deal with. One is in Missouri and one is not. Callaway County, I think that's the one we're probably most familiar with. It's just right outside of Highway 94 in a little town called Reform, Missouri. That's ours. That affects 4 counties around the plant. Then there's one in Brownsville, Nebraska, but it's right on the river. So if you draw a 10-mile ring around that plant, it affects one of our counties here in the state of Missouri. So when we begin planning, the first thing that we look at, one of the first things that we look at is the emergency planning zones. So I mentioned earlier the 10-mile rings. So if you were to draw a 10-mile ring around the plants, that would be the emergency planning zones. So anything that falls within there would be jurisdiction to work with. We're talking schools, daycare centers, lots of stuff, and we'll get into that here in a little bit later as well. But those are the 2 plants that we deal with here in Missouri. There's 5 counties within those emergency planning zones. You've got Atchison County, which is up north. We've got Callaway, Gasconade, Montgomery, and Osage counties. Our shop here, we maintain a laboratory, which will calibrate a lot of the equipment. We maintain a large fleet of equipment out there at the fire services, at the ambulance services, at hospitals, all of those locations. If they're within the emergency planning zone or they support the emergency planning zone, then we maintain equipment for them to have on site and ready to use. So that's Jim Jack's job, and he maintains our lab. Okay, so we're gonna get into a little bit of the nuclear power plant stuff here. I think the first thing we need to do is kind of talk about what constitutes an emergency. And if you look at a power plant and how it works, the first thing on the very far of the inside, you have fuel rods. Those fuel rods inside of them have little pellets, and they're about the size, if you think about a Sharpie pen, about that big in diameter, and then maybe about 1/2 of an inch long. What they do is they take those pellets and put them into a metal rod, and that's known as cladding. And so then those rods are then put into an array or cluster, and then the plant will then decide where to put those to make power. How they control the fuel rods from interacting with each other is that they use control rods. And that's the name of the game for controlling the reactions, is where those control rods are positioned. So that would be your first barrier. There's 3 total barriers. The first one is the fuel cladding that goes around the actual uranium oxide pellets. So the second barrier would be the reactor vessel itself. All of those rods are then put into arrays and then put into a reactor vessel. These reactor vessels are very big, usually made of concrete, multiple feet thick of concrete. And so that's the second barrier. If you look in the picture in the lower left-hand corner, the orange area would be the container vessel. So if that vessel somehow was to be breached in any way, the emergency level is increased. Finally, you have a large structure that contains all of this. It's a big, large concrete structure, a building, for lack of a better term, usually multiple feet thick. I believe Ameren's is 4 feet thick, and then on the inside of that's 1/2 inch steel plating. So the concept of that is to protect the reactor core from both external threats, tornadoes or something else. And then should something on the inside fail, protect the outside from radiation. So that's the container structure. That's the final and third level barrier of containment. So just real briefly, and this is a very simplified version because I'm definitely not a nuclear engineer, but how power plants work. The name of the game is to turn the generator, and they call it out at Callaway the moneymaker. And if you think about power generation, a lot of times it's just making a generator spin. There's no difference in wind or even coal-fired plants. They're just spinning a generator. And in the instance of coal and in nuclear power, they generate steam by some process of making heat. So in the reactor core, they generate heat, which then creates steam, to turn a turbine, which then turns the generator. So there's 4 emergency classification levels. These classification levels are determined by the plant. What I'd like to do is go into actions taken at the state and local levels to kind of give everyone a perspective on what everyone is doing at that time. The power plant has a responsibility for making those notifications. They're tested routinely on making proper notifications. As we progress from an unusual event to a general emergency, usually the safety and possibility of a radioactive release becomes much more likely. So the first emergency classification level is an unusual event. So the events in progress or have occurred which indicate a potential degradation of the level of the safety of the plant or indicate a security threat. No release of radioactive material is requiring offsite response or monitoring is expected unless further degradation or safety occurs. For us here at the state, the SEOC is not required to activate per our plans. Always give the director the discretion to activate his floor if he so chooses. That's his discretion, but per our plans, it's not required. What we're doing at this point at the state level is we're making notifications per our procedures, calling all of our partners and making them aware of the situation. Definitely getting in contact with the risk counties and making sure that they're aware and discussing any kind of resource requests or anything like that that they may have at that time. So at a notice of unusual event, not really a lot is occurring at that time. Should things either progress or begin, these incidents can occur one of 2 ways. They can either progress through these different emergency levels. That's how we typically train, through exercises. History has shown that over the vast majority of time in real situations, they will most likely begin and end at the declared level. So if the plant declares an alert, it's more likely that they'll end the situation at an alert. But the events in progress have occurred or involve an actual or potential substantial degradation of the level of safety. And I'm not going to read all that. The point is that basically we're starting to lose some of those barriers to protection at this point. Potential loss of one barrier can cause this. Here at the state level, we're going to activate our floor to a minimum of level 4, which is enhanced monitoring. Obviously, we still give our director the discretion to elevate that if he so wishes. We're still making notifications. We're starting to communicate at this point. We're taking much more actions at an alert. Probably our director would be interacting with the governor's office at this point, making him or her aware. The governor can elect to issue an executive order at this point. That's his or her discretion. Local EOCs, they can be activated, or they can assume an increased readiness posture. That's up to them. Liaisons at this point, SEMA and Department of Health is probably going to be sending liaisons to the plant for situational awareness at that point. And we're definitely going to be establishing communications links with the at-risk counties. So the next level would be a site area emergency. This is progressing in severity. Still, there's no expected levels of radiation to escape the plant boundaries, the site boundaries, but there's a potential multiple barrier loss at this point, which is elevating the situation to a site area emergency. Should this be declared at one of our facilities, our state level response would be at a minimum, we would activate our floor to a level 3. Obviously still giving the director the option to elevate that further if he wishes. Okay. At a level 3, what that means is basically we're bringing select emergency support functions to the floor. Those that routinely work with our program, and they've drilled with us on multiple occasions. The Highway Patrol, MoDOT, Department of Health, DNR, just to name a few. Those are kind of the primary agencies. Missouri Department of Conservation is involved, and then Department of Social Services. So those are our ESF partners at this point. We're still making notifications. We have a large notifications procedure book. Basically, we have a person that's on the phone nonstop. That's their job during these exercises. And if this was ever to be a real incident, that would be their job as well. So at a site area emergency, there's what we call protective action recommendations. And these are precautionary actions that can be taken. So what we would send to the risk counties at the state level for approval would be control access 2 miles around the nuclear power plant and shelter your livestock within the 10-mile EPZ and place on stored feed and water. What would happen is Department of Health would send that down to the counties. The county commissioners would then review our recommendations and either approve or deny those recommendations. So that's how that process works. At this point, we're getting federal partners online. We're definitely asking for Department of Energy at a minimum, put them on standby. The FBI, if appropriate, and definitely FEMA is going to be involved. We now have a FEMA liaison that works here at our floor pretty much full time. We've already fully integrated them into our exercises, and they have checklists and everything for rep response. So the things that they would primarily be involved with at this time would be closing railways, closing river space, river access and travel, and then airspace. And then finally, we have a general emergency. This would be the most severe. And basically at this point, a release is either expected, has occurred, or is imminent. So kind of the guidelines there is the EPA protective action guides. That's kind of the standard that they go on. If it either exceeds or does not exceed is the standard. Our plan is to activate the CEOC floor to a level 2 at this point. A level 2 is all ESF partners are at the floor. And that's per our plans. We're still making notifications. We're closing down river and rail and the river at this point. We're requesting federal resources, and because a release either has occurred or is about to occur. This is finally the level where the public can be impacted. So at this point, commissioners could potentially request evacuation. It's their choice to either request shelter in place or evacuate. If they choose to evacuate, they have to have a place to go. And so one of the things that we do is we provide shelters for them to go to. And so that's part of the planning process, is where are these shelters located and at what time do they open and things like that. The PARs, protective action recommendations. At this point, the Department of Health is primarily providing recommendations. We talked about evacuate or shelter in place. They're intimately involved in that process. Again, at the state level, we're providing recommendations. Those county commissioners are going to have to decide what they would like to do. what's in the best interest of their public. Okay, before I move on, those are the 4 emergency classification levels and kind of what we're doing at the state. Is there any questions before we go on, or are we all okay?
I did not see any in the chat.
Okay. So Ashley, just a heads up, we're going to be pretty quick here. This is going to be done, and it's right before lunch, so I don't think anybody's going to complain too much. But
Okay, speed round. I'm ready.
All right, planning. I promised I'd talk a little bit about planning, but planning is ongoing and extensive. There's a lot to plan for, especially within those 10-mile EPZs. We're fortunate in the fact that a lot of land that's inside of those 10-mile EPZs here in the state of Missouri is rural. Farmland, especially the one up north, it's extremely rural. So if you think about the nuclear plants out east, where they have a large population living inside of their 10-mile EPZ, it's a much different situation. But it does involve multiple agencies. You know, I've already talked about FEMA. The Coast Guard has a small role that's primarily in with respect to the rivers. They actually control the rivers. EPA, we have letters of agreement with the EPA for laboratory assistance and things like that. And then to some degree, the NRC. Thankfully, we deal primarily with FEMA and not the NRC, but they are definitely involved in this process. At the state level, you've got us here at SEMA, Department of Health. They have a really big role. They're our number one, they're our go-to folks for field monitoring teams. They maintain 2 field monitoring teams, and if they need help, they'll call in DNR. Department of Social Services is involved with reception centers and also emergency support function on the floor. Department of Ag, you've got cows, chickens, turkeys, whatever the case may be, that can be potentially affected. So Department of Agriculture has a role, as well as MDC for their conservation areas that are within the 10-mile EPZs. So we talked a lot about the ESF partners. There's a lot, there's too many to list. But if you think about all of your emergency support functions, we interact with them with our program at least once a year. We try to exercise that portion annually. So we already mentioned the counties, those emergency managers and us, we talk on a fairly routine basis. Thankfully, we've got emergency managers that have been doing this for a while, so they're pretty familiar with our program, and that's always a plus. So within the EPZ, you've got a lot of special facilities. So, and all of these require plans. So we've got schools that have plans. We've got daycare facilities. Any daycare facility that falls within the 10-mile EPZ, we have to go out and make sure that their plans are updated. Hospitals. There's no hospitals within our EPZs, but we have to have a hospital for the EPZ. So for example, for the Callaway plant, we can transport to either St. Mary's here in Jefferson City, or we can transport to University of Missouri in Columbia. And that requires training and plans. So we train with the hospitals on a biannual basis. So there's that work that we do too. Reception centers, we're required to show proficiency that we can set up a reception center. I think that's biannual now. That just changed. The National Weather Service, they're primarily, they provide the emergency alert system. So when it gets to a certain level, we will activate the National Weather Service to send out messaging. Nebraska, we work with them with Cooper plant. They're always a good group to work with. The Coast Guard, they're involved. We would basically interact with the Coast Guard through the FEMA Watch Center, through Region 7, most likely through our liaison here in the floor, but they're involved with the rivers. And then the EPA, we talked about that a little bit already with the laboratory assistance. Local fire departments and ambulance services, I should have added ambulance services on there. They're involved. If they're going to operate within the EPZ, they have equipment. That equipment has to be maintained annually, has to be calibrated annually, and that's a service that we provide them. The University of Missouri, on 2 different occasions, we have the ambulance and emergency department for emergencies, radiation emergencies, and then also the MER, which stands for MU Research Reactor. If we needed samples analyzed, we have a letter of agreement with them that they would analyze our samples. So Ashley, that was a really fast rundown of our program, but that's what I have for you today.
That's great. Does anybody have any questions that they want to come off mute and ask Jason, or if you're having trouble coming off mute and you would like to, just put it in the chat and I'll try to help. You can also ask your questions in chat, but I'm also going to put Jason's contact information that he had on that first slide and my contact information into the chat. If you have questions about the presentation, contact Jason, but if you have any questions about the September series, please contact me and I'll be happy to help. So we will open it for questions.
Yeah, so that's a great question about the cyber event. Here at the state and the offsite, with respect to the nuclear plants, we don't really get into the cyber stuff too much, but the nuclear plant definitely does. I know that for a fact, that their computers are locked down. It took them, I can't remember, it was a very long time. It was in the months time frame, if not years, just to get a new program approved and through their IT department. So yeah, that's something that the nuclear power plants have to deal with, but not so much offsite. Well, I hope it was worth your time, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you so much. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out.
And just, I'm going to stay on just for a few minutes too. So if your question's kind of long, I'll stay in the chat and wait for it. So thank you everybody for joining us, and hope to see you again next Tuesday.